This is a short tutorial video on the template. Basically, what I've done is I've created two different templates for tracking voluntary and compulsory funds to better understand the difference between the two. Voluntary funds, there's no restriction in terms of the annual drawdown, which you can see over here based on these assumptions. The annual drawdown gradually increases to the point where the capital is fully depleted, which is in 21 years. If you factor in the fees, which I've said is 1.25%, then it does obviously eat into the returns because we are working on 8% return relative to the escalation of 6, which means the resulted rate is 1.89 rounded off, which is not ideal. You can change any variables you wish to see the impacts. Obviously, the funds would last longer if you do achieve a 10% compound return, which would depend on the asset class that you select. If you'd like to see the full table of the cash flows, then you can just click the button. It performs a macro. If you want to put it back, it'll also perform the macro. The sheet is protected, so you can't accidentally delete anything. And it'll pull through obviously all the information into a graph with a bit of explanation. Now there's two different explanations. It'll tell you when the capital depletes, or if you're in a case where, let's say this particular scenario, the drawdown is very low. Let's say the drawdown is 5,000 Rand a month, then there is no depletion. You'll see the funds are growing. There's an explanation saying that the funds will never deplete because your annual drawdown is very, very small. Obviously, in reality, that may not be the case. So I'm going to put it back to what it was. And then with compulsory funds, basically, this is where you've got the limitation between 2.5% and 17.5% as per the Pensions Fund Act. So I'm using the same assumptions here as the voluntary, that you can then do a comparison. However, you can start to see here that the income starts to deplete. And as it gets to the maximum drawdown of 17.5%, then it actually caps. And you'll see that the income at retirement starts to go down. So it doesn't go to naught, it tapers very slowly, as you can see over here. And that's the main difference between the voluntary and the compulsory funds. I've got a calculation here which calculates how many years pass until it reaches the maximum. And in this case, it's 17 years based on an initial drawdown of 20,000 Rand, which is 4.8%. So this is just a nice way to illustrate how you can compare between a voluntary investment versus a compulsory. If you want to see the full table, just click the macro. The button will unlock the cash flow, and you can start to see here that the income is dropping into the several hundred rands, which obviously adjusted for inflation, the buying power of this money would be virtually nothing, unfortunately. But it is well into the future when this investor's most likely passed away. Then what you can do is you can track the two cash flows on the comparison tab, where you can look at the voluntary compulsory funds. This is exactly the same assumptions: capital invested, the age, the growth rate, the escalations, and you can see the model of how compulsory funds tapers down versus voluntary, where it actually depletes in 20 years, 20 years from now, versus it just gradually growing. And the reason why it's quite useful is because you can have a strategy of compulsory funds versus voluntary. For example, you might take a lower amount over here. You might take 10,000 over here, and on the voluntary you might decide to take 25 and see how it would pan out. So as you see over here, your voluntary funds is depleting quickly, but your annuity, your living annuity is gradually growing because you're taking 10,000. Obviously, depends on the client's requirements, but one has to be realistic about obviously their income. They might decide to change it in the future, but let's just go and put it on 15 for now and see what the impact would be. And you could start to model it out. And the idea is you want to sort of blend the two so that when your voluntary is running out, you've got your compulsory, which will then continue to generate an income for you. So that's why it's quite useful to use this. You can use different ages. Let's say, for example, you want to start tapping into the retirement funds at 55. This is age 55, obviously it's 65. So when you match it over here, here's the income from 65. And then when you start drawing it from your voluntary, obviously you would combine the two together. So there's a few models and scenarios that you can run, but basically it's just a nice tool for education purposes, just to see the impact of utilizing both different investment vehicles and their rules in terms of the Pensions Fund Act when it comes to annual drawdowns.